Colin Dwyer. I'm a game developer at Doinksoft and the human resource manager. That's a joke.
I'm Joseph Bourgeois. What am I at the Doinksoft? What am I calling? I don't have any good titles.
Game maker person.
I was the double president. Now Britt's the president.
Double president.
I'm just not the president of Doinksoft now.
That last name's awesome. I'm gonna have a fun time trying to spell that before I Google it.
Oh yeah, it'll be easy to find. Well, depends on how you start the word, maybe.
What did you learn from like Demon Throttle and Gato Roboto that you brought with you into Gunbrella?
I think we learned a lot of a workflow together. We're a pretty small team. Like our core is me, Joseph, and Britt. And we have an animator that worked on us on both of those games that's working with us on this one too. I think we learned a lot about how to work together and kind of like what our identity is with the way games feel, I think.
Gato obviously came first. I think we learned a lot from that. Or probably just take Colin's answer, delete mine.
So talk about where the idea for this game come from. Obviously, like you were Western inspired, but what other things inspired you to make a game like this?
What do you mean like a game like this? You mean like the theme of it, like the world?
Yeah, like the theme, basically, like the Western theme, right?
I think the idea initially, the seed of that was probably Britt wanted to draw some steampunk-esque settings and characters, and we just built a world off of that. I guess, yeah, I don't think of it as like a Western, but it's just its own weird little world. Like it's not Earth or anything. It's not the West or anything like that. It's more like just a weird little planet.
It's weird because like steampunk is a really cool genre, and it's not really explored very much in film or media, especially in video games. Like I can think of like a handful of games that are kind of steampunk-y, you know, like steampunk world and that kind of stuff. But like, there's not a lot of that. Like, why do you guys think that is about like that genre not being taken advantage of in the video game space? Because it is a really cool genre.
Well, I think with like film or, you know, other mediums, it's probably because it's expensive to make sets for it. But I think like steampunk itself is actually way more niche than you'd think. Everybody always kind of wants to take their own little spin on it. I think like ours, I think it's not quite steampunk. It's like a little more like diesel punk or something like that. We call it noir-punk in our.
It's crude punk.
Yeah, everybody wants to do a blank punk, but nobody really
cyberpunk,
wants to do
steampunk
thing, and neither do
noir-punk.
Yeah, like I remember we first started working on the game, and I was like, "All right, we can do it, but no gears, man, no gears." And then we got so many gears in the game.
Now there's gears everywhere.
and I have to admit, like, you kind of need the gears to make it look cool, because yeah, they look like technology, but they don't look like too advanced of technology. They get the idea across that there's some sort of energy flowing around because the gears are moving around. We tried to avoid it being a genre thing exactly, because we like the world to feel like its own thing instead of just, and Gunbrella especially is that way, because looks like steampunk, but it's not exactly, and it looks like a Metroid game, but it's not exactly. It's somewhere in the middle of everything.
I feel like in your design documents, you would have that note in the top being like, no gears, and then like fast forward 2 years later, more gears, exclamation point. But talk about like, so like it's like a platforming, like how would you describe it? Like a platforming bullet hell? Was that what you would say? Like a roguelike platforming bullet hell? Like how would you describe Gunbrella if you would give it a genre, a label?
It's definitely, I'd say mostly I'd call it an action platformer. It's not a roguelike. There's nothing randomly generated in it. There's not permanent death or anything like that. As far as the action stuff goes, I'd say it's an action platformer with adventure elements, but then there's also like kind of like towns that kind of feel a little bit like RPG towns where you're talking to NPCs and kind of figuring out what the local drama is and trying to advance your own investigation into what happened to your family.
Yeah, I'd call that the adventure element. So it's like
action adventure platformer, I'd say.
Let's use the word kinetic in there. It's a kinetic action adventure.
Dynamic.
I think what's really interesting, especially in games like yours, when you have like, you're not randomizing instances or randomizing levels or having procedure generated levels, you have to like, it almost takes more work because you have to like craft those stages individually, craft those encounters linearly and individually to make a better experience. Like, what are some of the challenges when doing that as opposed to like making something that was completely randomized?
It's probably mostly just like the time and labor for making levels. I think probably like close to half of our time is spent on the actual levels themselves, and then like another good chunk of it is spent on the kind of narrative design, which is a lot of stuff that takes place in a level. Even right now, we're going through and doing a pass on some levels in like the middle of the game that we had finished a while ago that been making them a lot better. And there's like a lot of attention to detail, because in a procedurally generated or randomly generated game, you can kind of get away with something looking a little bit out of place because somebody's like, an algorithm generated this, and it works for that kind of design that somebody's going for. But for ours, we're trying to create a sense of place and space, and there's a reason that this rock is here. Like there's like a geographical reason, like, oh, it fell from the ceiling right here, and it's kind of telling a little bit of a story of what's going on in the environment around you.
Yeah, I think one of the earliest like constructive feedbacks we got when we were showing this game to Devolver was we had a lot of tiles, but there wasn't enough character to the maps where it felt like each map was a place, like a specific place. And so something really early on that we started to focus on heavily was making each part of the game feel like a place, whether that's just through like the geometry of the level, through having a special prop in the scene that looks like, oh, this is so-and-so's bed. Even if you don't know it's their bed, it was like made specifically for that scene so that it would look, like this room isn't just a room, it's this room in this position next to this room in this town. So there's all these little elements that kind of bleed over from being in one environment will affect the way a room looks. The character that lives in there will affect the way that is, or stuff like that.
It's like the custom tailored feel, right? Like you have to make each thing individually to make it feel special. Yeah.
Handcrafted. So, and I guess so the roguelike thing, it's funny, a lot of people have thought that it was a roguelike. I didn't understand. Maybe it's because of the style of the art is used in roguelites a lot, like this kind of pixel art, certain scale of pixel art maybe. But making a randomized game that feels handcrafted would probably be an extra doubling of the workload, because generally in roguelikes, each room is just meant to connect with any other room or any other the set of rooms.
Right, yeah.
So it almost is the opposite of handcrafted in a way.
In roguelikes, I'd say like the rooms or the levels are levels or maps, where in our game we're trying to make them more like places.
Can we talk
all
about
the maps are connected up, so it's like we're creating these little places that should all together, once you play through it, feel like you're in this little world,
But it's not Metroidvania, so people are clear, right? It's not like a huge map you're exploring. It's like there's individual levels that will eventually like transition into new levels, new areas.
Yeah, all the levels are connected via there's like a few different things that kind of connect greater, I don't know, you might call them like worlds or something if you were to think of them traditionally. Like we use a train that brings you to different places, but all the levels are geographically connected, like in a Metroidvania, but it's not.
It's more like an open world in a way, but like a really
little bit
small open world.
The reason we're not calling it a Metroidvania is because a core pillar of that design is that you get power-ups that allow you to explore more of the world, and our world's more story-gated than it is power-up gated or what your abilities are.
Can we talk about where the idea for the umbrella came from? Is there like a fun story behind that? I feel like you guys are parodying like the Gunblades in Final Fantasy a little bit.
But it definitely, the whole game started with the idea of a Gunbrella, and we'd even tweeted originally the prototype that we were working on was a little cuter, a little more Kirby-like, and it was just like you have this thing. The idea was always a platformer with like pretty dynamic movement that you use this one tool that's a gun and an umbrella, and the name was obvious. So
that's funny. Joseph, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. Yeah, I knew that was an idea that Britt and Cullen had been kicking around before we even started working on it, like years before, maybe even before Gato.
Yeah, I think we'd had the original idea before Gato.
It was funny because like Gato, like I definitely felt the Kirby inspirations in that game, but I think the unique thing about that game was that it was in black and white, which it's really rare now to see games like that. There's only a handful of them. Did that conversation come up in the early design concept if you guys were going to do it in black and white again, or if you guys wanted to go to color?
I think Britt really wanted to do something because Britt's kind of a primary art director with the game. I think Britt really wanted to do something a little more detailed and a little more unique. He wanted to break away from kind of the retro look of Gato Roboto, and we pulled him back into it for Demon Throttle, but he wanted to break away from the retro look and do something a little more modern looking, even though it's still pixel art, and because he loves colors. It's not like he doesn't love colors, even though he came up with the 1-bit thing for Gato Roboto. I think if we did another 1-bit game, somebody would assume that it was in the Gato Roboto greater universe or something like that, too.
Yeah, everything has to be connected now. We can't have individual things anymore. It all has to be its own cinematic or gaming universe.
The Doinkverse.
Yeah, don't think we're not thinking about that too. Cause yeah, and I think that the idea for black and white wasn't. I mean, there's multiple reasons that Britt would tell you. Like, I think one is that it's easier and faster to make. But I think that's kind of a joke answer, but also true. But I think part of it is like just coming up with something that stands out when you look at it, you know immediately what it is. And somehow I think Gunbrella also does that a little bit. It's something about the red brown color palette. I know immediately that I'm looking at Gunbrella at this point, you know, that the visual style is developed, because it does have a unique palette. That was like, I think one of the first things Britt figured out was the palette, the color palette in the game. I think he settled on it like in the first demo, and like it hasn't changed. I don't think. Yeah. I think the backgrounds have different colors, but the main colors of the game like are defined pretty early on, so that like he can build, using those colors, build like a varied world and interesting characters out and try to squeeze as much as possible out of a limited set of colors. I think it's 16 colors or 24 colors or something.
Yeah, I think it's for especially on the outside, people don't understand like color theory is a huge thing in games. Like they don't. I think it's a really big deal. Like what colors you use, what colors complement. It's the same thing in film, especially animated film. Like it's a big process and a big how do you do. But for platforming specifically, like what's the biggest challenge in making a game feel really good to traverse around? Because it's a 2-dimensional plane. You got to make sure that jumping feels good. Are you sliding? Are you sliding too much? Not enough?
I think it's iteration. It's usually we focus really heavily when we make games on making, especially like the player character or characters or however the player's interfacing with the game feel really good right off the get-go. Like whatever the core of the game is, I think we usually focus on that first. And that's not to say we don't work on it and improve it over time, but it's a lot of iteration. So with Gunbrella specifically, you know, we had the idea of dashing in the air and being able to hover and all these really context sensitive directional things that you could do. If I point the umbrella up, I'll be floating with it. If I push it down, I can pogo on the ground with it. And we're like, what's pretty much everything that you could do with this umbrella? And then you kind of get the blueprint for all those things, and then you go, yeah, you know, that dash could go a little further, or when I bump into something, it could go flying further back, and I could go flying less far back from the collision. And it's just kind of like chipping away at it and chiseling at it until it really kind of delivers to you the thing you want.
You know, I think we also tried to implement all those things that feel good right at the beginning before we even can move around in maps. So we do it in like a single room, so it should feel good even in a single room. And that was the first thing we did before we expanded or tried to scale it up or anything. We just made sure it felt good that way. Yeah, you just keep tweaking it over time. And we still make adjustments to it even now, but just pretty small things at this point, like certain edge cases with the umbrella stuff.
I would imagine you're making really minor adjustments up to like your last minute when it's ready to go to
hopefully not.
The quality assurance or whatever. Yeah,
our producers would hate that, but that's definitely what we do. So
yeah.
You guys mentioned that there's a story in this world. Like, what is the story in this world? Like, it sounds like you took a lot of time to craft this breathing, alive world with these interesting characters and places that you're exploring.
There's kind of several things going on. The main story that your character's following is that wife was murdered and his child is missing. And at the scene of the crime, the Gunbrella was left. It was like the murder weapon. So he kind of takes it up and then and it has an insignia on it and a few hints, and so he's kind of going about the world trying to figure out who it belonged to or who did this. Along the way, you come from a land that isn't really the land that the game takes place in. And so then you're kind of exploring this kind of greater metropolis area, looking for clues with that. And then the world itself it's not Earth, it's not like an alt history or a future thing. It's just kind of its own world that's dependent on a fossil fuel that's like colloquially known as crude, and it's an invented fossil fuel, and there's a lot of repercussions to that fuel being used up, and there's like a lot of class divide in the world, and then there's cults and cops and stuff like that going on in the world too. So
what were some of the inspirations for that story? I mean, did you guys watch some television, film, other games, perhaps comics?
I feel like some of the cult stuff might have been influenced by what was that show we both watched? You watched it first.
Oh, The Leftovers. Yeah.
Yeah. The cult stuff maybe I think might have came from that, like the priest character maybe. Like in that show, like there's this idea that this event happened that no one can understand. Yeah, basically in that show there's a bunch of different groups of people have different explanations for the same phenomenon, and none of them might even be correct. In the world that we've created, there's these supernatural events that are happening, and the cult has one explanation for it, the church has one explanation for it, the townspeople have their own explanations for it, and as the player, you're not sure if any of these things are even correct. And so you kind of have to play through this game and make your own mind up about what you think it's really all about, you know? Because there's never like a scientist who's like, here's what's actually going on. Accidentally, we felt like there was a lot of references to Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Especially early on, and we didn't even mean to, but we realized.
Yeah, and then the remake came out during it, and we're like, man, this was just.
There's things in our game. There's things in our game already, like the saving by sitting on benches. We hadn't played remake until like I think it was like a month after we put that in. And we're playing it, we already had this thing in our mind because at the time, the way we were constructing the story, we realized was, you know, Midgar, Final Fantasy VII storyline. And so obviously that was a really early version and it changed, but we're playing through the remake and then like 3 or 4 times through the game, we're like, shit. And like, I think our character's name here and there would be like a reference to that. And like, we're okay with having those little references, but yeah, it was like, I don't know, some of it was coincidence, some of it was probably subconscious, I don't know.
It's funny how like your subconscious will do that. Like obviously that game had a positive effect on one of you guys, so like it plays into like designs and you're not even realizing you're doing it and you're doing it. Like that's weird how that works sometimes. Elaborating more on the gameplay, can you guys talk about the weapons? Because like you have the Gunbrella, but there's also like you also have like a knife combat system where you're like almost Scrooge McDucky jumping on people, and you have like grenades and some other weapons. Like what's some of the tools we'll be using to defeat enemies and find your son or baby?
Yeah, the primary tool that you use is the Gunbrella, and kind of the modes that it can work in is gun and umbrella. So you have infinite ammo using it as a shotgun, which is pretty close range. You can bump into enemies to stun them or push them away. You can block their bullets. If you time it well, you can reflect their bullets back at them using the umbrella. And then the other ammo types you see are limited. They have ammunition, and they're more like different ammo that you kind of shove into the Gunbrella and shoot. And we showed I think there's the rifle ammo and grenades in the demo we're showing. We have a few more too. And you kind of just find those are more just for play style, and if you're having issues getting close range with something, using the rifle might be good. The grenades shoot really slow, do a lot of damage, but can also hurt you. We have a saw blade, I think, that's been shown in some videos as well, that you can shoot really, really, really fast, and it kind of bounces off of enemies. As weapons go, I think that's about it. You'll be able to upgrade certain things about default Gunbrella too.
Yeah, there's not really any tools or any other gadgets other than the Gunbrella in the game, and that's another reason I think that we were like, oh, this isn't a Metroid game, because in Metroid or Zelda, for example, like half the game's joy comes from finding these tools and expanding your gear set. We were like, okay, in this game, we're just going to give you all the gear straight up from the beginning. And now the only thing that changes is being able to get ammo drops, so you can have, you know, different shooting styles, but the weapon's the same, basically the same weapon.
I know, I was gonna say, like, you know, your combat system seems really involved. Like, you have like deflecting, blocking, jumping, melee attacks, dashing. So like, it's not like you compared to Zelda, where like I think I got those golden gloves and I used them twice, and that was it. Like,
Right.
they were only used to move these two things, and like that. So like, I didn't really get to use them. But like, you make up for that lack of having like a bunch of different items or upgrades by having a really in-depth combat system that's complicated and fun to play.
Yeah, we later on in the game we were trying to vary the combat more with having different ways that you have to dispatch enemies. For instance, in the swamp area, which is an area shortly following the area that's shown in the demo, we have these turtles that have shells, and then your bullets just kind of tink off of them when you shoot them, and you have to knock them with the umbrella and kind of flip them over like the turtles in the arcade Mario Bros. And then they're vulnerable on their stomach for you to shoot. And yeah, so I don't think the combat really gets boring ever. Even if you just had the same default enemies all the time, I really love moving around in this game in order to like double make sure that the enemy behaviors change in ways where you have to get better at using the maneuverability and all the full repertoire of what the Gunbrella can do.
You know, people really liked Gato Roboto. Like, was there any pressure when you're making? It doesn't have to be specifically Gunbrella, but other games you're working on to like live up to that. I don't want to say legacy because it's not that old yet, but like, you know, to live up to the hype of that game for your community that really loves it. Like, is there any pressure on you and your team? Because it's super small and it's a much more personal project than when you're working at like Blizzard, where there's like 200 people working on one game. You know, it's much more personal when someone gives you constructive feedback or doesn't like something or likes something.
Yeah, definitely. I saw like a tweet recently that said making games is like saying the same word over and over and over again until it doesn't seem like a game or like a word anymore. And like, you look at a game that you're working on all the time, and you forget if it's good or not. And I think the nice thing was, you know, getting to show the game at PAX and seeing people really like it. And during this, Steam Next Fest, seeing people seem to really like it while they're playing it, being like, oh yeah, this game is good, but you kind of lose a sense of if it's good or not. And like, you know in your heart it is, but you look at it and engage with it for several hours every single day, and then step back and play Gato Roboto. I'll sometimes go play Gato Roboto. I played it when I got the OLED Switch, and I was like, this game's really good.
We're so good.
Like, I don't know, are we making
something
as good as that? Is definitely something that's always on my mind and something I want to be true. And it can be good in different ways. It doesn't have to be good for the same reasons, but and I expect some people will like Gato Roboto more, and I expect some people will like this game more.
Now, Joseph, you have a demo on the Steam store available now, people can play, but I'm just curious, like, when you guys decide a game's going to be early access or not have early access, or just make a demo? Because the demo is great for like the trade shows and stuff. You get your vertical slice, it plays nice, people can get an idea of what the gameplay is like, but there's no early access on your game yet, which is slated to come next year. Is there a reason behind the no early access? Do you think you guys will do early access?
The way we've been operating, and in general, the way our games are kind of like straightforward A to B experiences, even Demon Throttle, which a lot of the progression is based on repetition and replay. It's still a linear game with a start and an end. And for us, like, to put a game that's unfinished in early access that's mostly based on giving a discrete experience like that, it would feel like we would ruin that experience for most of the early adopters. You know, it's like if you watched an early cut of the new auteur filmmakers movie where they still had some like placeholder footage and like, you know, other stuff in there, like, you wouldn't really be able to see the final movie unless you're like a super fan who just like wants to eat up every little piece of it. Now, if we were going to make an online multiplayer game or something that was more of a community thing that can evolve over time and will anyway, that would make sense. But these are all like linear, story-based games. It would be, to me, it would be ruining it for a lot of the audience. So we just try to keep quiet about the game until it's getting close enough to release where people won't mind waiting another few months,
You guys have done like limited physical releases before. Like, what dictates that? Like, do you wait to see Steam sales before you decide to do that? Is it something that's planned out years in advance? Is it something that happens like sporadically from like, does limited running games reach out? Like, how does that process work that you can talk about generically? I'm not talking about Gunbrella specifically, just generically. We can use like, Gato or Bacto or Demon Throttle as an example because you've announced that stuff already.
Yeah. We work with special reserve games on the physicals that we are doing. They had actually asked us if we wanted to do a Gato one even before Gato had launched, and we weren't. It was our first game as a studio, so we weren't sure if we wanted to adopt that risk or not when it first came out. And then it's been out for so long, and they've been asking us the whole time, and we're like, yeah, well, but we've been so busy with other stuff that we're like, yeah, we'll get to it. And then with the Demon Throttle thing, it was because it was a physical copy only type thing. It was more, we had been pitched the idea of doing the physical only thing, and we're like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And then they handled that. And then while we were doing it, they're like, hey, so since we're doing this, how do you feel about doing the Gato Roboto one? We're like, yeah, let's do it. So it's more just like if we give them the go ahead, then they'll just they have a whole team of, manufacturers and graphic designers for the manuals and the booklets and stuff. And we basically just sign off on the artwork and design and stuff, and relatively smooth process to do it because they have such a good system set up for getting stuff out. But it's basically, if we ask for it, I think we can get it. We'll probably do one for Gunbrella.
And then guys, when does Gunbrella come out? You're slated next year? Do you have like a month, a quarter, or just next year when it's done?
I think it's just officially next year right now. I know, hopefully shooting for the first half of that, but if you say a date and then you don't make the date, people get very upset. So
they really do.
Hey, a little controversy couldn't hurt us. I'm just kidding.
There's what's the saying? No press is bad press, right?
Like that. I don't believe that.
Well, thank you guys so much. So Gunbrella comes out in 2023 on Steam. Any plans for a Steam Switch? And I think, let me look at your site again. Let me see. Steam and Switch were the two good platforms. Any plans for PlayStation or Xbox at this time?
We like both of those platforms, and we've done work with Xbox before, but we don't have any plans at the moment for it. We'd like to, probably.
TBA or something.
If everybody buys our games, then it makes a bunch of money, then yes.
Support it. That's what I say. Support it on Steam, and then if it sells enough, then you usually get a port on the other consoles. Does your team do your own ports, like for the Switch?
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we did Switch and Xbox. We haven't done PlayStation yet, but we both love PlayStation. And PS5 would be great for this game too because of the triggers. So definitely something we're thinking about.
Perfect. So where can they go to find out more information about your game? Discord, Twitter, website, that kind of stuff.
We're on Twitter at Doinksoft, and then we also have a landing page for the game at gunbrella.com.